In the analysis of human downfall, we rarely witness a sudden collapse. What we witness is erosion. The tragedy of Jesse Pinkman is not that he was born a monster, nor that he was seduced by evil. His tragedy is that he was born with a conscience he could neither afford nor escape. A fragile moral apparatus dropped directly into the gears of an unyielding criminal machine. When we first meet Jesse Pinkman, he is performing a caricature of criminal deviance, operating under the moniker Cap and Cook, mixing chili powder into low-grade methamphetamine. Jesse wears the aesthetic of an outlaw like a child wearing his father's oversized suit. But psychologically, who was Jesse before Walter White re-entered his life?
Jesse was a product of conditional parental love. In the middle-class suburban home of Adam and Diane Pinkman, affection was an exchange rate tied to performance and conformity. When Jesse failed to meet the rigid, sanitized standards of his parents, he was quietly excised, replaced by a younger brother groomed to fulfill the family mandate. This created a foundational attachment wound, a deep-seated belief that his true self was inherently flawed, unlovable, and destined for disappointment. Psychology terms this conditional self-worth. When a child internalizes that they are only valuable when pleasing authority, two primary defense mechanisms emerge: complete withdrawal or performative rebellion. Jesse chose performative rebellion. His early posturing, the oversized clothes, the slang, the hyper-masculine bravado was not a sign of criminal intent. It was a protective shield. He adopted the role of the bad kid because failing at being bad was far less painful than failing at being good. This void made Jesse the ultimate prey for a sociopathic personality like Walter White. Walt did not merely enlist a partner, he identified a starving ego. When Walt stepped into the RV, he brought with him the terrifying weight of paternal authority. Walt was Jesse's former teacher, a figure of judgment, expertise, and hierarchy. Where a healthy adult would have seen a manipulative narcissist, Jesse's damaged psyche saw a father figure who finally paid attention to him. Walt mastered a destructive psychological cycle, love-bombing Jesse with sudden explosive praise, followed immediately by harsh devaluation and verbal degradation. This intermittent reinforcement created a profound psychological bond, a trauma bond, from which Jesse would spend years attempting to break free. Pay close attention to Jesse's physical reactions in these early seasons. While Walter White experiences a thrill from danger, an awakening of his dormant ego, Jesse experiences visceral terror. His body revolts against the violence. When he is threatened or if he witnesses murder, he hyperventilates. This physical distress is critical. It proves that Jesse's moral compass was never broken. It was merely overwhelmed by his desperate need for belonging and his inability to say no to authority figures. He was an empty vessel, and Walter White filled him with poison. If Walter White represented the oppressive demand for utility, Jane Margulis represented the intoxicating promise of total escape. In Season 2, Jesse's psychological trajectory encounters its first major fork in the road. Jesse's relationship with Jane is often romanticized by viewers as a pure love ruined by tragedy. But a psychological autopsy reveals something far more dangerous. It was a codependent collision of mutual trauma. Jane, a recovering heroin addict, was fighting her own battles with control and paternal authority in the form of her father, Donald. Jesse, battered by Walt's demands, brought his unhealed wounds into her apartment. When two individuals suffering from severe emotional deficits merge, addiction often becomes the third partner in the relationship. Heroin was not just a drug for Jesse, it was a psychological anesthesia. It allowed him to mute the screaming cognitive dissonance inside his head, the voice telling him that he was helping build an empire of suffering. Notice how Jane and Jesse speak when they are high. They speak of escape.
Where do you want to go? South America? Australia?
Is New Zealand part of Australia?
New Zealand is New Zealand.
This is the classic hallmark of escapist fantasy disorder. Neither of them has a realistic plan for survival or recovery. They possess only a shared desire to erase their present reality. The death of Jane Margulis is the psychological epicenter of Jesse Pinkman's long descent. When Walter White stands over that bed and chooses to watch Jane die, he commits an act of unimaginable cruelty. But the psychological violence doesn't end with Jane's death. It is turned directly against Jesse. Walt allows Jesse to wake up, discover her body, and believe that he killed her through his own negligence.
This is the birth of Jesse's chronic, destructive self-loathing. By convincing Jesse that he was responsible for Jane's death, Walt anchors Jesse in a state of terminal guilt. In psychology, when an individual accepts responsibility for a tragic event they did not cause, it is known as internalized moral responsibility. Jesse's logic becomes distorted. If I am capable of destroying the only person who loved me, then I am inherently toxic. I am a monster. When Jesse enters rehabilitation, he attempts to process this immense grief, but he is given a flawed therapeutic tool. The rehab counselor encourages him to accept who he is.
You should be here to learn self-acceptance.
The counselor meant accepting his human flaws and addiction, but Jesse's traumatized brain interprets it with terrifying literalism. He returns to society and announces to Walt, "I'm the bad guy."
This is not an act of empowerment. It is a psychological defense mechanism known as self-fulfilling identity framing. By officially labeling himself as the bad guy, Jesse attempts to protect himself from future heartbreak. If he is already the villain, then he cannot be disappointed by his own failure. If he embraces the dark, the light can no longer blind him.
You either run from things, or you face them.
He arms himself with nihilism as armor, unaware that this very armor will facilitate his complete annihilation. If Jane's death fractured Jesse's self-worth, the murder of Gale Boetticher destroyed his soul. To understand the psychological devastation of this moment, we must examine the concept of moral injury. Moral injury occurs when an individual is forced to perpetrate, fail to prevent, or witness acts that deeply violate their own fundamental moral beliefs and expectations. It is distinct from PTSD. PTSD is a reaction to fear and danger. Moral injury is a reaction to the destruction of one's own ethical framework.
Look at Aaron Paul's performance in this scene. Jesse is not a cold-blooded assassin executing a rival. He is a young man being forced to execute his own humanity to save Walter White. When he pulls that trigger, the bullet passes through Gale Boetticher, but the psychological recoil destroys Jesse Pinkman.
What follows in early season 4 is one of the most accurate depictions of acute traumatic dissociation ever captured on television. Jesse turns his home into an unending 72-hour nightmare party. He leaves his door wide open. He lets strangers strip his house to the bare walls. He throws wads of cash into the air. Why? This is sensory flooding as ego death. Jesse cannot tolerate silence. In the quiet, the memory of Gale's face demands his attention. To avoid his own mind, he fills his environment with deafening noise, blinding light, and chaos. He is trying to drown out his internal monologue. He isn't partying to celebrate, he is partying to execute his own consciousness. He is begging someone, anyone, to break in and end his life. He has rendered his physical safety entirely meaningless because his internal self is already dead. When Jesse attends his support group in Problem Dog, the therapeutic illusion shatters completely. The group leader preaches self-acceptance without judgment, but Jesse recognizes the moral bankruptcy of unconditional self-acceptance for atrocious acts. Jesse doesn't want forgiveness, he craves punishment. He wants the world to tell him he is evil, because if what he did to Gale is acceptable, then the universe has no moral order whatsoever. By rejecting the group's soft grace, Jesse makes a profound philosophical point. True redemption requires accountability, not excuses. Jesse's refusal to forgive himself is the last thread holding his core humanity together. He would rather live in agonizing guilt than pretend his atrocities did not matter. Seeing Jesse's vulnerability, Gus Fring and Mike Ehrmantraut initiate a brilliant psychological intervention, or exploitation, depending on your perspective. Gus recognizes that Jesse cannot be controlled with money or fear. He can only be controlled through purpose and competence. They stage a series of pickups where Jesse is allowed to play the hero. For the first time in his life, an authority figure, Mike, gives him straightforward, non-manipulative respect. Under Mike's gruff tutelage, Jesse begins to stabilize. His posture changes. He speaks clearly.
If he wants to learn how to make my product, he's got to do it my way.
He takes pride in his work. He goes to Mexico and successfully cooks a 96.2% pure batch of meth for the cartel, proclaiming,
I'm the guy your boss brought here to show you how it's done.
This is the tragedy of Jesse's competence. Even his triumphs are built on shifting sands. He believes he is building a life of self-reliance, but in reality, he has merely been traded from one master to another. And waiting in the shadows is Walter White, who will never allow Jesse to belong to anyone else. The psychological dam breaks in Season 5, Episode 11, Confessions. When Jesse realizes that Walter White poisoned young Brock Cantillo with Lily of the Valley just to manipulate him into turning against Gus Fring, the entire tapestry of Walt's deceit unravels instantly. Jesse realizes that every major tragedy of his adult life, Jane's death, Gale's murder, Brock's near-fatal illness, was orchestrated or weaponized by the man he viewed as a father. When Jesse cries out,
"You can't keep getting away with this!"
he is not just talking about Walt's crimes. He is screaming against the cosmic injustice of narrative manipulation. He is speaking for every victim of narcissistic abuse who has ever watched their tormentor praised by the world while they suffer in silence. This is the bottom of the abyss. All that, combined with the murder of Andrea Cantillo, was designed to strip Jesse of his last remaining humanity. For 6 months, Jesse is subjected to institutionalized slavery, chained to an overhead track in a lab, forced to cook meth, starved, beaten, and kept in a concrete pit. Yet even in those brutal conditions, a flicker of his will remained. He attempted to escape. That desperate bid for freedom was met with swift, devastating punishment when Jack and Todd executed Andrea right before his eyes. That was the moment Jesse's spirit finally surrendered. He collapsed into what clinical trauma studies call learned helplessness, a state where, after facing inescapable suffering and total loss, the brain ceases attempting to fight or escape and becomes a hollow ghost inhabiting his own skin. It is only when Walter White infiltrates the compound, unleashes his automated machine gun to slaughter Jack's gang, and frees Jesse from his chains that the final confrontation occurs. Standing among the bodies, Walt slides a gun across the floor and asks Jesse to kill him. Walt wants one last dramatic moment of shared fate.
Do it.
He wants Jesse to act as his executioner, tying their destinies together forever in blood. By refusing to pull that trigger, Jesse breaks the cycle. He denies Walter White his grand finale. He refuses to be Walt's weapon ever again. For 5 seasons, Jesse has acted on the orders, manipulations, and emotional demands of others. In this single act of refusal, Jesse reclaims his agency. He leaves Walt to die by his own creation. As Jesse drives away into the night, screaming and crying, viewers often ask, is this joy? Is it madness? It is the raw, agonizing scream of a soul clawing its way back from hell. It is the sensation of nerves reawakening after months of complete numbness. He is free, but he is fundamentally broken. In El Camino, we see the final phase of Jesse's psychological integration. He does not return to a life of crime, nor does he seek cheap vengeance. His final actions are focused entirely on rectifying his debts to the innocent. He ensures Brock Cantillo receives his final goodbye, and he pays Ed the Disappearer every single dollar owed down to the exact bill. He has moved beyond the illusion of easy redemption. He knows he can never undo the deaths of Jane, Gale, or Andrea. He cannot erase the meth he cooked or the lives he ruined. True maturity is not the absence of guilt. It is the capacity to carry that guilt without letting it turn you into a monster. In the end, Jesse chooses his own path. He chooses Alaska, a land of quiet solitude, cold clarity, and fresh snow. Alaska's not a paradise. It is a canvas of silence, where a traumatized man can finally begin the quiet, unglamorous work of rebuilding his life. Walter White gave up his soul to achieve an empire. He died surrounded by cold steel and glass, isolated, leaving a wake of ruin behind him. Jesse Pinkman gave up his empire to save his soul. He suffered more than almost any character in modern television history, enduring physical slavery, emotional torture, and the loss of everyone he ever loved. But he emerged on the other side of that nightmare with his fundamental capacity for empathy intact. Jesse's story is a tragedy, yes, but it is a tragedy crowned with a profound, quiet victory. It reminds us that no matter how deep the trauma, no matter how systematically our self-worth has been dismantled by those who claim to love us, the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity to survive. You can break a man's body. You can chain him in a dark pit. You can force him to build poison. But so long as he refuses to abandon his conscience,
he can never truly be conquered. As Jesse Pinkman drives into the snowy silence of the great northern wilderness, he is no longer Captain Cook. He is no longer Heisenberg's assistant. He is no longer a problem dog. He is, at long last, himself. Thanks for sitting with us through this deep dive. If this look into Jesse's journey hit home for you, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below letting us know your favorite turning point in his story, plus which character's psychological breakdown we should analyze next. Until next time, take care of yourselves.